let me go ahead and get started. I'm going to go over the 1094 and 1095 forms. And the instruction document that I have up here is the best document that I have to that I would suggest you read this document and make sure that you understand what's required of you for the 1094 and 1095 forms. So let's start with the 1095. This form is essentially like a healthcare W-2 is what I like to call it. This is going to be provided to full-time employees, or if you're self-insured, it will be full-time and part-time employees. I should say anyone that has healthcare coverage. So anyone with healthcare coverage for self-insured clients, or for clients that are not self-insured that use a third-party provider for administration, this form is only required for full-time employees. So essentially, the section at the top is just employee information, employer information. Part 2 is really the nuts and bolts or meat and potatoes of this whole form. This is where you're providing the offer and coverage codes by month for each employee. So for each employee here, for each month, we'll put the offer of coverage indicator. The instructions document has the codes. There's about a dozen of them, I believe, to indicate different types of offer and coverages that you're providing to your employees. Line 15 is the employee share of lowest cost monthly premium for self-only minimum value coverage. This is what is referred to as your bronze plan. This is the employee share of what they're paying for that bronze plan. Now, if you read also in the instruction book, this value is only required for certain line 14 codes. So if you're doing a qualifying offer, code 1A for line 14, this line 15 amount is not required. It's only required for line 14 codes of 1B, 1C, 1D, and 1E. In the instruction document, I have a little bit more on that. So then line 16 is your applicable safe harbor. This is essentially if you have any kind of safe harbor for the employee, this is where you'd put it. This also includes indication that the employee is currently enrolled in the coverage, or that they're, for example, not employed, those kind of things. If there's a safe harbor code, you would essentially put it here. This is also only required in certain situations. For example, again, if the employee has a qualifying offer, line 14 of 1A, this box isn't required. So only required in certain scenarios. Oh, I should say it's not required for 1A. It could be if the employee is enrolled in it. So again, the instruction document will kind of give you an overview of what to do here. Then for part 3 is really just for self-insured clients. Again, I mentioned them before. So it says right here, if employer provided self-insured coverage, you need to put your covered individuals per employee. So employers that are not self-insured, essentially your healthcare provider is going to send this information to the IRS. So for self-insured clients, you will simply put the name, Social Security, date of birth, and then the months of coverage. Pretty straightforward for the covered individuals. Not much calculation, no calculations required here, just who they are and when they were covered under the plan. The second page of the document is sort of like the back page, is just the instructions. So essentially what Empower is going to do is going to generate a PDF where this is filled out for a page for each employee that we have the data for. And let me talk about that a little bit. If you've gone through the instructions, basically FMS is just, the PPACA system is just a repository for the data. So it's the client's responsibility to calculate these fields and then put it into the PPACA system. And I'm going to go over that next. But essentially it's the client's responsibility to make sure that the data is uploaded properly, it's calculated properly and uploaded and everything's complete, so that we can generate these forms. So we're still waiting on more guidance from the IRS for these forms. For example, the biggest issue right now is we're waiting on self-sealer version of this form. We don't expect that the IRS is going to require all employers to print this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and stuff them into an envelope. That's just, way too much work for a client with, 10,000 employees. So we're waiting on some more guidance before we finish development of these forms so that we can create self-sealer versions so that for clients that if you utilize FMS to print your checks, or if you print your own in a sealer version where you have a machine that folds and kind of glues it, where you have paper that has a glue on the edges, like a tear-off edge kind of thing, we would be expecting for this form to have that similar setup, just like an employee W-2, where we can just print them and then run through a sealer machine instead of stuffing them. So we haven't actually developed a program that's going to generate this, or I should say it's not complete, but once we get complete guidance from the IRS, hopefully in the next couple months, we'll have a program to generate this form in a PDF file, one page for each employee that we have the data for. And then let me go over the 1094 very quickly. This is obviously much more straightforward. This is just the transmittal page. So we just got the employer information here at the top, and then some basic questions down underneath. Is this the authoritative transmittal? Total number of forms, I should say 1095 forms that have been submitted. Certifications of eligibility, just kind of check boxes here. The second page has a little bit more information. This is accounts, full-time employee counts, total employee counts, whether or not minimum essential coverage was offered. So the PayPower system will also generate a PDF similar to the way that 941 is generated. We'll be able to generate a PDF like this, indicating everything that you've chosen. So let me show you, for example, the mock-up of the screen, what it's going to look like to generate both of these forms. So like I said, this is still under development because we're waiting on guidance from the IRS, but I'm going to show you this form now. Essentially we've got contact name, phone number, a date range. Obviously you're running it for a calendar year. The government entities we're not concerned with, obviously. And then just some pretty straightforward default information on the right for us to look at the database, which I'll talk more about in a minute when we get into the employee detail records. For the type of hire, the date type for terms, event categories for the employee events, and then the category codes. And then down on this bottom left is information for the 1094, authoritative transmittal, ALE member, and then the qualifying offer. So these questions right here in the bottom left correspond to part 2 on the 1094. So what you check on the screen is basically what comes checked on this box here, on these boxes. But let me show you really the nuts and bolts going back to the 1095 and how we get that data into the system. On your menu, at the very bottom, you now have PPACA menu. When you come in here, we've got 4 new options. I should say 3 new options and 1 existing. So the average hours worked report, we've had out there now for longer than a year. We developed it to when the end of 2013, when employers were required to make sure to start doing their due diligence for average hours to make sure the employees were in line, get an idea of who you're going to have to provide offers to. So this is a shortcut to that same report. I have a example of it here. So this is the existing report we've always had with the historic average hours report, where it lists each employee name, some employee social security number, total hours for the date range, and then we calculate averages and wage information here. And then underneath we've got job codes, employment status, hire dates, term dates if they are termed, those kind of things. This can also be run to Excel as well. So that report's we've always had that. This is just another shortcut. We threw it into the menu because obviously it's concerning the same information. And then we have the employee events, which is the 1095 Section 2. And then we have employee dependents, which is the 1095 Section 3 for self-insured clients. The employee master import is your spreadsheet import to get the data in, which I'll talk about at the end. So let's start with the employee events. All this corresponds to the 1095 Section 2, as I said. So again, what we're looking for here is for each employee for a date range, which corresponds to these month boxes, looking for box 14, 15, and 16. So essentially what we do is we're going to create a record for each line. I call them boxes. Sometimes I use those two terms interchangeably, line or box, line 14, box 14. But so the event category, there's only one. We're just going to choose ACA. And then event code, there's really just 3 of them. Oh, I got to choose ACA. And then there's 3 event codes that correspond to each line on Section 2 of the 1095, line 14, 15, and 16. So when you choose any one of them, the next thing we need to do is put in a date range. So this obviously, as I said, corresponds to the months that we check, that we are going to put the code into here, or if we put them into the all 12 months. So for example, this employee was full-time the whole year, maybe a store manager or something. They're receiving a qualified offer for the entire year. So I'm putting in 01/01/2015 to 12/31/2015. Now I can also leave the end date blank if I wanted to, because I know that this employee is not going anywhere, let's say, but obviously I would have to remember to come back in here and put the term date in when the employee is terminated. Or so basically what I would suggest is we just do each one by year. We're calculating all the information by year, so we should definitely put in an end date. We could also add records by month if we wanted to. So I could put 01/31/2015 in here. So if we have each employee calculated on a spreadsheet by month, we can import 12 line 14 records where, okay, even though there's 12 of them, they're all 1A, well, that's fine. The system's just going to look at each record to calculate the 1095, I should say, to print on the 1095 here. Then the value is the box code, obviously. So the value is basically where we're putting the that code, whatever you want to put in for the month or the time period that you want, you put in here is the value. So this is obviously what the goal would be to calculate this into a spreadsheet, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then import this data. So if you wanted to, if we needed to, I should say, put in a box 15 code, I can just put in event code 15, line 15 I should say, and the start and end date. And then for the line 15, it's a dollar amount, so we're going to put that value into the amount field. So instead of the value for line 15, we're going to use the amount. So if the bronze plan was $100 for the employee share, I can just put in $100 here. And then box 16, if it's required, I can put in here, again, start date. I forgot my start date up here as well. And then we're back to the value box. So the values is your alphanumeric codes. So for example, this was a value 2A. The values are for your numeric codes for line 14 and 16. And the event code 15, line 15, we're going to use the amount box here. So this is what a record would look like, 3 records would look like for an employee that has all 3 lines where it's the same really for all years, for the whole year. And so obviously if I needed to add more records, I can do that as well, where I'm putting in, like I said, by each month or however you need to for each employee. So that's the 1095. Now I'll go ahead and save that, that's fine. Okay, and then the employee dependents. So this is section 3 of the 1095. So covered individual, name, social, date of birth, and the months covered. So again, similar layout here. What we're doing here is highlighting the required fields because there's a lot of extra fields that are on this screen, the employee dependent screen, that were not required. Any of this information at the bottom is not required. So really we're just looking for the exact same fields that are printing on the 1095, no more, no less. So again, coverage effective date, that's your start date, coverage end date, employee's last name, first name, middle initial you can put in there but it's not required, the dependent's social security number, and their date of birth. So putting all this information in will print on the 1095 in part 3 down here at the bottom. So if you need to add additional, you just obviously hit the plus symbol to add another record, and you can key all that in, and then we get a scroll bar here on the left so we can review a lot of information. So obviously a lot of information that we have to retain here. So again, FMS is just kind of a repository, as I mentioned earlier. So really what you're doing is getting this information into the FMS PayPower system. So obviously, instead of having to do all the work of keying the information in, we created spreadsheet imports for both of these tables, the events table and the dependents table, for you to import via spreadsheet. So I can send out these templates to everyone on the line, and we can make them available later on. But I have templates here that it's specified in the instructions exactly how to do it. And these are the same things that we use in the screenshots. So for example, starting with the events import, the record type is really what tells the system what data or what tables to import in, what the data is that we're importing. Okay, so for the events table, the record type is ES2. The event for the dependents, and it's ET1. Let me start and we'll review the events table in totality here. So essentially we've got the employee number, obviously required, the event category, event code, a sequence number, the start date, end date, event amount, and value. The next date is in the instructions not required whatsoever. You can just skip that field. Comments is also just an optional field if you want to put comments in there. I didn't actually mention that when I went through the employee events, but this is the comments field here. If you want to put any comments in there, you can into this box. It's just a kind of a blob field where you can key in messages. So that would go, those messages would go in here in this comments field, but you can see again, we have the event amount and the value here for the record. So for 14, we're using the value. For 15, which is the dollar amount for the bronze plan, we've got in the amount field. And then for the box 16 code, we've got 2A back on the value field. And then on the dependent side, a little bit more information just because of the name fields and all the dependent information. So, oh, and let me go back to the sequence number, excuse me. The sequence number is required. You would increment the sequence number essentially if you were going to create more than one event code for the same employee. So for example, if I copied this record and I would change this, if I was going to change this to 2015-06-30. Okay, so let's say that this goes to the end of June and then I do 2015-07-01 to start from July 1 to the end of the year. This is where I would increment the sequence number to 2. The way that you can remember that, easy rule of thumb for me, is basically the fields that are in front of the sequence number, it have to be unique in order for the sequence number not to change. So the minute that I have 2 records with the same fields, all the fields in front, I'll include record type. So all 4 of these fields, when they are all the same, that's when I increment the sequence number. Anything in front of the sequence number, needs to change in order for me to keep the same sequence number. So then on the dependence field, it's the same thing. There's only two fields in front. So this indicates, okay, I need to change or increment the sequence number for each dependent that I'm uploading for a single employee. So for this employee here, I'm uploading two dependents, and so I'm incrementing the sequence number. But then when I change the employee number, I can go back to a sequence number of 1. So again, I indicated the record type is ET1, employee number, sequence number, and then same fields on the screen, last name, first name, social, date of birth, the start date, end date. And then middle name if you want to include it. Company number is also on here as well, but it's also used on the screen, which I'll talk about in a minute. So each one of these, this is how you want to essentially format the data in preparing to upload it into the system. The instructions go through everything in detail, but essentially I'm not going to actually do it, but I'll just kind of review everything. You would save this file as a CSV, and I can show you what they look like. Oops, I'm sorry, maybe I don't. Let me go in here. Oh yeah. So here's what they look like after I save it to a CSV file. Okay, it's just each value with a comma is separating them. Okay, and then the events table, same thing, just in the data separated by a column. And you'll notice I also deleted the header record. We don't need that. We don't want to import that into a record. So I can delete that either from Excel or using like Notepad like I'm using here. I can delete the header record before importing it. So to import the CSV files, you want to go into this, the fourth option I haven't talked about yet, is the employee master import. So we go into the employee master import, and first thing I want to do is select the file. So I'll go to my desktop, ACA, and choose my CSV file here on the end. I'll choose the events one to begin with. And then the options down here, you want to just keep the same as I indicated on the screenshot in the manual. So this is a comma separated or comma delimited file, so we'll choose delimited. There's no quotes, as we saw in Notepad here. There's no quotes around the values. So we want to, for the file options, to say no quotes. The year format that we're using is year, month, day. You could use the month, day, year format or date format if you want to use that in the CSV file. Amounts do have decimal point and decimal places. And we want to import directly with the employee number. The only other thing that I need to do here is to select the company number, so I can hit the drop-down box or just key in the company number. And then when I'm done, I just put that in there. Once all the options are set up, I'll just hit process. It'll say process complete. Any errors will be down here. And I'll also be able to check an error report, so I can click on report here to view an error report. So errors obviously will be things like the employee's not found, the event code is not found. I don't have any errors here. The event code is not found. The event codes are only the 14, 15, and 16 here. The category is wrong. There's only one category, again, ACA. The record type is wrong, those kind of things. So, and the dates, of course, to make sure that they're formatted properly. So obviously the most important thing is that the employee number matches and we've got all the data formatted properly here. So that concludes getting all the data imported into FMS. Let me go over some of the questions that we've come in here. How do we run it to Excel? Basically, you want to obviously leverage Empower is the easiest suggestion. either a custom Empower report or the PPACA report that I was referring to here, the average hours report. You can run that to Excel with this option, open in spreadsheet. And we can, if you don't have instructions, I'll send those out after this meeting along with the Excel templates. But basically the goal is to get the data into Excel, whether that be through Empower or through any means that you have that you're running reports on a monthly basis to calculate this information. And then calculate the line 14, 15, and 16 values as needed. Every client's different, so some clients have different measurement periods and effective periods, offering coverage periods. So use your rules with the data that you can pull out of PayPower essentially to calculate these values and get them into Excel for upload as I've demonstrated here. Do we have to use the employee number on the file, or can we use the Social Security number? I apologize, I didn't skip that. That answer is yes, you can use the socials. Let me go back to the employee master. So right here, there's an option to convert Social Security number to employee number. So in that scenario, in this field, you would just put the Social Security number. Okay, just put that into this field. You don't have to create a new field or anything like that. That's on both spreadsheets. You would just put the Social Security number, and then when you're converting to the Social Security number on the import, you would just choose this option. I will definitely update the manual and put that on here to indicate that option. I totally skipped that, so that's a great question. On the error report, does the error report tell you which employee the error was on? Absolutely. Let me show you that, for example. I probably should have actually shown you an actual error. So let's edit the file, and let's do an employee number of 9999. And I'll save that. And I think I have the same file still. Let me go back to import directly. So let me hit process. Okay. So you can see right here, it tells me on the screen like the first few errors. Employee not in master, employee number 99, and it gives me the employee number there. So then, of course, when I run the report, it's going to give me that same error message, except obviously it's just going to be in a PDF file. Just go ahead and hit submit there, and it just brings it into a PDF file so that you can see all of them listed out here. And then essentially you can, you would then want to narrow the file down to just those errored employees and import just them, because you obviously don't want to duplicate it. Although you can, the system won't let you because of the sequence number, really. So it's not going to let you import duplicate data because it's not going to allow a duplicate sequence number. So, for example, let me switch over to the events. Without this field here, so if I upload this employee again with that same sequence number of 1, it's going to flag an error. So it would be easier to, instead of ignoring all those errors where it only accepts the ones that were an issue on your first import, just narrow it down to those employees that errored on your first import those in a second run, and then you'll have a much better clean error report so that you can, if you have any other errors, you'll be able to pinpoint those. I'm looking for any other questions. I don't see any. So obviously, I'm sure other questions are going to come up, but so just don't hesitate to shoot any of the PayPower team an email. We can all answer questions on this if anything comes up. And then obviously, once we have the forms, the forms developed. Oh, and I also didn't talk about the electronic file. We're also waiting on instructions from the IRS for the electronic file. There will be a version of the electronic file that gets submitted to the IRS, just like the EFW2 file. So instead of printing a whole nother set of copies, paper copies for the IRS, as we used to do back in the day, we will just simply submit an electronic file that has both the 1094 and the 1095 information. on it so that we can get that information. So we will do another webinar later when we finalize both the paper versions and the electronic file. So that answers a question that just came up. What happens if you realize you have items incorrect in the data? Just go ahead and contact one of your FMS support people. We can assist you if you've made a mistake on the import. It's probably easiest just to do that, and we can pinpoint those records and either delete them or fix them, whatever is the case. Okay, well that concludes the webinar. I'll definitely send out the information as promised, the templates, everything else. I appreciate your time, everyone. Thank you very much.